They expect a crown for showing up, but sometimes showing up is all they do. Because with avoidance, even the smallest gesture gets wrapped in layers of meaning, not for you, but for them. They often contribute the least, yet present it as though they've crossed oceans. A simple text, a neutral check-in, a brief moment of presence. Suddenly, it becomes this grand emotional effort in their narrative. Not because the action itself is extraordinary, but because vulnerability feels dangerous to them. So anything that pushes them even slightly out of their emotional comfort zone gets elevated as a monumental step. And you unknowingly get pulled into that distortion. You begin to feel grateful for breadcrumbs because those crumbs arrive with the weight of "this is hard for me," even if they never say the words out loud. Their minimal effort is framed as something effortful, not because it truly is, but because it allows them to avoid going deeper, to avoid offering more, to avoid acknowledging the emotional intimacy that terrifies them. What you're really dealing with is someone who wants recognition without responsibility, someone who wants emotional rewards without emotional risk, someone who wants the comfort of connection without the accountability that comes with it. Their mindset often becomes, "I tried, isn't that enough?" Even when what they call trying is the bare minimum of human connection. They expect praise for moments that are basic in healthy relationships: consistency, presence, follow through. But to them, those things feel like they're giving up control, stepping into vulnerability, or allowing someone too close. And so instead of expanding their capacity, they inflate the value of their minimal effort to avoid having to give anything more. This is why avoidants become defensive when their effort is questioned. To them, they've already done something that felt risky. They've already pushed the boundary of their emotional comfort. They don't realize that from your side, it barely registers. They see themselves as giving more than they ever have, while you see them as giving less than they should. And that mismatch creates the silent tension between you, the tension where you're starving for effort and they're convinced they've served a feast. But the truth is simple: showing up isn't the same as participating. Presence isn't the same as investment, and emotional crumbs are not a meal, no matter how beautifully they're presented. Avoidance wants special treatment because in their world, the internal struggle is bigger than the external action. The battle they fight within themselves feels massive, even when the behavior that emerges looks small. And unless you understand that dynamic, you end up lowering your standards to match their threshold for discomfort. Yet here's the deeper truth: you deserve someone whose effort doesn't need to be magnified to matter. Someone who doesn't treat consistency like a rare royal gift. Someone who understands that showing up is the beginning, not the grand finale. Avoidants may expect a crown for their minimal effort, but you don't have to bow to it. When they invest little, they demand a lot, emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. Because with avoidance, the imbalance isn't just in behavior, it's in the emotional math they use. The tiniest effort from their side gets magnified in their mind as something meaningful, something heavy, something they believe should be met with gratitude. A short text, a small favor, a moment of vulnerability that lasts seconds but took them days to allow. These micro gestures feel enormous to them because they're measured against their internal discomfort, not the actual weight of the action. So to them, they're giving you something precious, something scared, something they feel they had to pull from the depths of themselves. But you're giving consistently, emotionally, steadily. You show up with clarity, kindness, communication, presence, and somehow none of it lands. Your effort becomes the background noise of the connection, expected, reliable, predictable. It becomes invisible because avoidance subconsciously assume your emotional labor is endless. They rely on your understanding, your patience, your empathy, your willingness to carry the parts of the relationship they refuse to touch. And here's the quiet truth: they never say out loud. They demand so much because they don't know how to meet their own needs. They rely on you to translate their silence, soothe their fears, interpret their distance, and stabilize the very connection they keep destabilizing. They want you to be emotionally fluent in a language they refuse to speak. Your mental energy becomes the cushion they fall on. Your emotional consistency becomes their safety net. Your spiritual strength becomes their grounding. And somehow, all of that becomes expected, while their half step toward you becomes worthy of celebration. This is the emotional distortion people rarely talk about. Avoidants don't consciously believe they're demanding a lot, but the weight of what they expect, understanding without explanation, forgiveness without accountability, patience without reciprocity, becomes heavy fast. They want you to fill in the emotional gaps they refuse to acknowledge. They want you to sense when they're overwhelmed, adjust when they're distant, reassure when they're triggered, and adapt when they pull away, without complaint, without question, without asking for more. It's not that they don't appreciate your effort, it's that they've built a life around needing as little from others as possible. So when they need something from you, even something small, it feels huge to them. And they subconsciously expect you to respond with the same intensity they feel internally. But your consistent effort, your emotional presence, it becomes the air they breathe, essential but unnoticed. And that's where the imbalance quietly erodes your energy. Not because you're giving too much, but because they're recognizing too little. But here's the grounding truth. You need to remember, your consistency isn't invisible, it's foundational. Your emotional effort isn't small, it's sustaining. And your presence isn't ordinary, it's rare. Avoidance may magnify their small gestures, but that doesn't mean you should minimize your own. You deserve to be seen with the same depth you offer. You deserve reciprocity, not emotional inflation. And you deserve a connection where effort isn't lopsided, it's mutual, intentional, and real. Their silence is not emptiness, it's a test of your devotion. Because with avoidance, silence is rarely accidental, it's rarely neutral, it's rarely just quiet. Their silence becomes a strategy, a shield, and a silent question all at once. They often withhold attention, affection, or validation, not because they don't feel anything, but because feeling something overwhelms them. And instead of leaning in, they retreat. Instead of communicating, they close off. Instead of offering clarity, they let the distance speak for them. But hidden inside that silence is an expectation that you'll bridge the gap for them, that you'll do the emotional reaching they're afraid to do, that you'll interpret the withdrawal as a signal to try harder, give more, or prove your loyalty. What makes this dynamic so exhausting is that it's unspoken. Avoidants don't ask directly for more effort. They wait for you to give it. They don't ask you to chase. They simply disappear. They don't ask for reassurance. They create a void and hope you fill it. To them, silence becomes an emotional litmus test. Will you come closer even when they're pushing you away? Will you stay connected even when they disconnect? Will you continue caring even when they make it painfully difficult to do so? And because you care, you often do. You respond to the silence with softness. You answer the distance with understanding. You compensate for the lack of effort with twice the effort on your end. But what you may not see is that every time you bend for their withdrawal, the dynamic shifts quietly, subtly, but profoundly. Your emotional labor becomes their comfort. Your pursuit becomes their reassurance. Your patience becomes their permission. And the relationship becomes uneven long before you realize it. The avoidant doesn't always intend to test you, but their fear of vulnerability creates patterns that function like tests. They want to see if you'll stay without them having to risk anything. They want connection without exposure, closeness without surrender, intimacy without the vulnerability that terrifies them. So they give less, then wait for you to give more. They pull back, then expect you to lean in. They offer silence, then anticipate your devotion. Yet, here's what most people don't realize. Their silence isn't a sign they don't care. It's a sign they're overwhelmed. Their withholding isn't a lack of feeling. It's a fear of feeling too much. Their retreat isn't rejection. It's self-protection disguised as indifference. But understanding this doesn't make it any less draining for you, because while they test your devotion, they rarely question their own. While they wait for reassurance, they rarely provide it. While they withdraw, they rarely consider how deeply you feel the distance. And so the emotional weight falls. You become the one maintaining the connection. You become the one navigating the silence. You become the one proving the devotion they never have to verbalize. But here's the truth you must hold on to. Your devotion should never be something you have to prove through pain, silence, or emotional imbalance. Your worth doesn't rise or fall depending on how well you endure someone's distance. Avoidance may test your loyalty with silence, But you deserve a love that speaks, shows up, and meets you with equal energy. They call it personal space. You feel it as emotional labor. Because when an avoidant says they need space, it rarely feels like a simple request. It feels like a shift, a subtle withdrawal that asks you to adjust, adapt, and absorb the emotional impact of their distance. Their boundaries are real, yes, but sometimes those boundaries disguise something softer, quieter, and harder to name: emotional laziness. Not laziness in the careless sense, but in the self-protective way that avoids intimacy because it feels like too much work. What they label as space often becomes a shield, and you're left doing the invisible labor of holding the connection together while respecting a distance you never asked for. Avoidants want the freedom to step back whenever emotions feel overwhelming. They want the freedom to disengage without consequences. They want the freedom to choose when they're available and when they're not. And yet, they still crave the emotional rewards of being in a connection, the comfort of your understanding, the reassurance of your presence, the warmth of your loyalty. They want to feel loved without feeling obligated. They want closeness without the pressure of consistency. They want a bond that stretches but never snaps, no matter how far they pull away. And that's where you begin to feel the emotional labor seep in, because you're the one translating their distance. You're the one soothing yourself through their silence. You're the one adjusting your expectations around their lack of effort. While they enjoy the relief of space, you carry the weight of uncertainty. While they recharge, you wrestle with confusion. While they take emotional shortcuts, you're the one taking the long road, patiently trying to understand what they won't say, trying to maintain connection without crowding them, trying to honor their needs while quietly silencing your own. Their boundaries become your responsibility. Their triggers become your navigation map. Their avoidance becomes your emotional puzzle. And in their eyes, this feels balanced because in their inner world, needing space is survival. They don't see the toll it takes on you, the overthinking, the self-blame, the tiptoeing around their emotional thresholds. To them, pulling back is protection. To you, it's pressure. But here's the twist most people don't see. Avoidants aren't trying to exploit you. They're trying to protect themselves from emotional intensity they never learned to handle. They want freedom, not because they don't care, but because caring overwhelms them. They crave emotional rewards because love feels safe when you're the one receiving, not giving. They aren't lazy in intention, but the effect can feel that way because you end up carrying the weight they can't hold. And this creates a silent imbalance. They get the comfort of your emotional stability. You get the responsibility of managing theirs. They get space. You get anxiety. They get freedom. You get the work of keeping the connection intact. But here's the truth you must remember. Love shouldn't feel like a job. Boundaries shouldn't become burdens. And someone's need for space shouldn't cost you your peace. Avoidance may call it personal space, but you deserve a connection where space doesn't come at the price of your emotional well-being. Apologies come wrapped in excuses, not actions. Because with avoidance, saying sorry rarely looks like true accountability. It often comes hidden inside explanations, justifications, or emotional detours that protect them from feeling exposed. When confronted, avoidants rarely fully own up, not because they don't understand what hurt you, but because taking responsibility requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is the very thing their nervous system is wired to escape. So instead of offering a clean, direct apology, they offer a softened version, something that sounds like understanding but never quite reaches accountability. They'll say, "I didn't mean it like that," instead of "I see how it hurt you." They'll say, "I was stressed," instead of "I should have handled that better." They'll say, "I'm just going through a lot," instead of "I take responsibility." In their world, explanation feels like enough. To them, giving context seems equivalent to repairing the damage. But to you, the effect is the same. The apology never lands. It never reaches your heart. It never acknowledges the impact. Only their intention, and intention alone doesn't heal anything. Avoidants often expect forgiveness for minimal disruption. They believe that if they show a little softness, offer a hint of regret, or express mild discomfort about the conflict, it should be more than enough. Their threshold for what counts as effort is so low that even a moment of emotional openness feels monumental to them. but to you, it feels incomplete. Like they open the door halfway and stop. Like you're left doing the emotional work of closing the loop, soothing the wound, and moving forward, all without the emotional reassurance you deserve. This dynamic turns accountability into something optional, something they can dip into, but never fully embrace. They hope that time, patience, and your understanding will fill in the spaces their apology avoids. They count on your empathy to do the heavy lifting. And because you care, you often accept their partial apology as the best they can do, even though it still leaves something unresolved in you. Their avoidance of accountability isn't about arrogance, it's about self-protection. To say I'm sorry without excuses means standing in discomfort, admitting fault, risking rejection, and facing the guilt they spend their whole lives trying to outrun. So they minimize, they soften, they redirect, they reduce the impact to avoid feeling the weight of it. And in doing so, they unintentionally place the emotional responsibility on you. But here's the truth. A real apology is not a fragile thing. It shouldn't collapse under pressure. It shouldn't require a translation. It shouldn't make the hurt person work harder to feel heard. You deserve an apology that includes action, one that repairs, restores, and rebuilds, not one wrapped in excuses that leave you confused, invalidated, or emotionally stranded. And while avoidance may fear accountability, you don't have to fear your standards. The apology you need is real, whole, and grounded, and you deserve nothing less. You're supposed to understand without them explaining. Because with avoidance, communication is often replaced by expectation. They rely on your intuition rather than their words, their silence rather than clarity, their moods rather than explanations. In their world, needing to articulate a feeling is already too vulnerable, too exposing, too emotionally risky. So they expect you to read them, to sense their discomfort, interpret their withdrawal, and adjust yourself accordingly. And the most exhausting part, the effort you put into decoding their needs is invisible to them. What feels like heavy emotional lifting for you feels like natural understanding to them. Avoidants often grew up in environments where expressing needs didn't feel safe or useful. So now, as adults, they move through relationships hoping someone will just get it without having to open the parts of themselves that still feel tender or unprotected. They don't tell you what they need, they assume you'll figure it out. They don't articulate their fears, they hope you'll soothe them anyway. They don't communicate their triggers. They expect you to avoid them instinctively. And when you inevitably misread something, not out of carelessness, but because you're human, it can create distance, tension, or disappointment. They never explain. You become the emotional translator of a language they refuse to speak. You read their tone. You monitor their silence. You interpret their avoidance. You adjust to their moods like weather patterns shifting, unpredictable, unspoken. And this is the invisible labor no one sees. The emotional vigilance, the constant attunement, the mental scanning of what they feel but never say. You end up learning them deeply, not because they let you in, but because you've trained yourself to navigate the maze they built to protect themselves. Meanwhile, they see your interpretation as empathy, not effort. They don't recognize that you are doing the work they're avoiding. They don't realize the toll it takes on your own emotional clarity. They don't see how much of yourself you give just to maintain connection with someone who rarely meets you halfway in communication. It isn't that avoidants don't value your understanding. They depend on it. But they depend on it quietly, unconsciously, and often without reciprocity. They want someone who won't demand explanations, someone who won't pressure them to open up before they're ready, someone who can navigate the unspoken without complaint. They want the benefit of being understood without the responsibility of expressing themselves. But here is where the imbalance begins to hurt you. Understanding becomes a one-way street. Your intuition becomes a requirement instead of a gift. Your emotional sensitivity becomes the foundation of the connection, not their effort. And the truth is, you deserve communication that doesn't rely entirely on guessing. You deserve clarity, not emotional detective work. You deserve partnership, not a puzzle. Loving an avoidant may require patience, compassion, and space, but it should never require abandoning your own need for transparent, reciprocal communication. Because love should be felt, not decoded. Shared, not guessed. Expressed, not extracted. You don't have to understand every unspoken thing, especially when they're capable of saying the words. When they finally step up, it's celebrated as if it's a gift, not a responsibility. Because with avoidance, moments of effort are so rare, so unexpected, that when they finally show up consistently, even briefly, it feels monumental. They often present their rare, consistent moments as special effort, something extraordinary, something that deserves applause. And because you've been surviving on emotional scraps, those small acts suddenly feel big. Their presence feels like progress. Their consistency feels like commitment. Their temporary stability feels like a breakthrough. But here's the complicated truth. These moments aren't gifts, they're responsibilities. Basic relationship behaviors become inflated because the avoidant rarely performs them, and you've learned to celebrate the bare minimum because anything above silence feels like a miracle. When they finally lean in, even just a little, it sparks hope. You think maybe they're changing, maybe they're opening up, maybe they're finally meeting me halfway. And for a moment, you breathe easier. You stop overthinking. You let yourself feel closer. But that relief doesn't come from their consistency. It comes from the exhaustion of carrying the connection alone for so long. And that's where the dynamic shifts into imbalance. Their small effort becomes huge. Your huge effort becomes normal. And suddenly you're overcompensating, giving more, trying harder, nurturing the connection because you don't want to lose the tiny bit of closeness they finally offered. Meanwhile, they maintain distance, not maliciously, but habitually. Distancing is comfortable. Consistency is foreign. Intimacy is overwhelming. So, the moment they step up, they also expect emotional credit, gratitude, softness, understanding. They expect you to adjust, to validate, to offer appreciation for something that should be natural, not rare. And because their effort feels precious, you may end up giving that validation freely. Even though it reinforces the imbalance, you praise them for things they should simply do as a partner. This becomes the emotional seesaw of avoidant dynamics. You give steadily. They give occasionally. You feel grateful for the occasional. They feel overwhelmed by the steady. Their rare effort becomes your emotional fuel, while your consistent effort becomes the background music. They don't realize how much you carry, how much you hold, how much you stabilize because they've normalized your reliability. But their inconsistency, it never stops feeling unpredictable, meaningful, impactful. And this leads to the quiet, dangerous pattern. You lower your expectations, you stretch your patience, you shrink your needs, just to maintain the connection without triggering the retreat. But here's what you need to remember. Someone showing up isn't a luxury, it's the foundation of connection. Consistency isn't a favor, it's the minimum. Effort shouldn't feel like a blessing, it should feel mutual. Avoidance may present their moments of presence as rare gifts, but you don't have to decorate their basics with gratitude. You're not asking for too much, they're offering too little, and you deserve someone who sees effort not as a mountain they occasionally climb, but as a shared responsibility they show up for every day. Loving an avoidant doesn't mean lowering your standards, it means seeing their bare minimum for what it is. Because when you care for someone who fears closeness, it's easy to slowly, quietly, unintentionally shrink yourself, to soften your needs, to adjust your expectations, to normalize emotional imbalance, as if it's the natural cost of loving them. You start to believe that their hesitation is depth, that their distance is complexity, that their crumbs are connection. You start praising their minimal effort because it feels like progress, not realizing how far you've drifted from your own standards. But loving an avoidant shouldn't require self-abandonment. It shouldn't require diminishing your emotional needs. It shouldn't require celebrating the basics as though they're blessings. Because when their bare minimum becomes your emotional maximum, you lose sight of what you actually deserve. Reciprocity, consistency, communication, presence. The things that make a relationship feel safe, not fragile, grounded, not unpredictable. Avoidants have their patterns: fear of intimacy, fear of vulnerability, fear of depending on anyone. And those patterns explain their behavior, but they don't excuse it. Understanding them is compassionate. Reducing yourself to accommodate those patterns is not. There is a quiet line between empathy and self-sacrifice. And avoidant dynamics can blur that line until you forget that you too deserve emotional nourishment. So here's the gentle truth. Your effort deserves recognition. Your consistency deserves appreciation. Your emotional clarity deserves a partner who meets you, not someone you're constantly reaching toward. Yes, avoidants struggle. Yes, their emotional walls come from wounds, not cruelty. Yes, they care more deeply than they show, but caring and contributing are not the same. Wanting connection and sustaining connection are not the same. Love that hides behind fear remains incomplete until both people show up fully. You can understand their wounds without carrying the relationship on your back. You can honor their pace without abandoning your own needs. You can hold space for their healing without shrinking your standards to match their comfort zone. Because real love, healthy love, holds two truths at once. I see your struggles, and I still deserve more than your occasional effort. Loving an avoidant is not about being endlessly patient. It's about staying rooted in self-respect while navigating their fears. It's about saying, I understand why closeness scares you, but I won't let that fear redefine what I'm worthy of. It's about recognizing that your empathy is a strength, not a tool for tolerating imbalance. The deeper message is this: you don't need to harden your heart to protect it from an avoidant. You just need to stop minimizing your needs to protect theirs. Clarity is not pressure. Boundaries are not ultimatums. Standards are not punishments. They are simply the truth of what you deserve. Loving an avoidant may require compassion, patience, and understanding, but it should never require losing the fullness of who you are. See their bare minimum for what it is, not what you hope it might become. And never forget, your heart deserves someone who meets your effort with equal depth, not someone who asks you to shrink to fit their fears.